Hi Rusical, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I wanted to get a little nostalgic and talk about my reading journey, and I found a perfect book tag for it. It's by Cari Can Read and it's called Where My Lore Started, and it's basically about your reading lore. The books that you loved as a child, you hated as a child, genres you gravitated to, the book you still remember and think about, all that jazz. In the comment section, don't forget to tell me about the book that you really loved as a child and you read all the time, because that's what I've done a lot. I had a minimal amount of books, though my father was a collector. We'll talk about it. The books that were available to me were from the library mostly, and I made do. The first question is, what's the first book you remember reading by yourself? And I had to really think about it because it's complicated. It's complicated because I read a lot as a child. Reading was actually this one hobby that my parents allowed me to entertain instead of doing chores. So I used the opportunity to the fullest. I specifically remember the summers that I spent at my aunt's and my cousin complaining that I was reading while she had to do chores, but she hated reading, and the adults were telling her that if she would pick up a book, they would allow her to just read and not do chores. So I was using this leeway to the fullest. The first book that I remember reading myself in those early days is Alice in the Wonderland by Lewis Carroll, which is one of those interesting novels that only masquerades as a children's book. Of course, as a child, I loved the whimsy of the world building. I loved the magical elements, the idea that this girl gets to travel this wondrous worlds. But when I reread it later in life as a teenager, I think it was a part of the school curriculum, I loved it more and it gave me something different. It's definitely one of those books that is deeper than the surface level, and it's also one of those books that is weirdly philosophical and smarter than it seems, and I enjoyed that about it. The second book that I remember reading myself is The Little Prince by Exupéry. It's a great didactic novel for children to understand the weight of responsibility. But unlike Alice in the Wonderland, I feel like The Little Prince is far simpler, and I don't feel the need to reread it. I know that a lot of people love it for its aesthetic, which is a little odd in my opinion, but I really don't understand the outpour of love for it in general. It's just a really simple story. And the next question is, what character did you most identify with in elementary school? I don't think that at that young of an age I tapped into who I am as a person yet to identify myself with any characters. And also at the same time, I don't think there were many characters that were really tapped into who I was as a person at the same time. The third question is, what was your elementary school comfort book? I don't think I've had one. I've read a lot back in the day as an elementary school student. I spent a lot of time in the library, but at the same time, I don't feel like I had a comfort book. The books were just way too simple for me, because I definitely had comfort books as a teen and as a late teen as well. They were adult books though, and I feel like I really found my spot there, reading from the adult section. The fourth question is, where or what was your safe space as a kid? Which feels like a pointed question. You kind of have to be an outcast in a way to need a safe space. I just really didn't need one. I had great social life in school. I had a few groups of friends. I had friends in middle school and early education in high school. So I didn't really need a safe space because I wasn't in danger or anything like that. So I can't really tell you. Fifth question is, how has your taste in books changed since childhood? And that question is really interesting to me. I definitely have certain trends that I've noticed I'm still on. I keep going in that direction. I still love those books and those genres, but at the same time, some of my tastes definitely changed. Our school library actually didn't have separate adult and young adult sections. Young adult section didn't exist in libraries at all. Young adult section is something that was introduced much later, so you could easily take out adult books from the library without much fuss from the librarian. But as a young teen, I definitely read more mysteries with younger protagonists, sort of teenage mysteries, usually with female protagonists, sort of like Nancy Drew, but just local stuff. There were a lot of those types of books in our library. I also read a lot of really embarrassing teen romances. Embarrassing not because it was romance, though when I was a teen, it was far more embarrassing and girly in a bad way because sexism was overpresent everywhere, to read romance in general, but I feel like I didn't care at the time. Those were embarrassing because of the tropes. They were very cringy, a lot of love triangles, love squares. The protagonists of those books were loser girls that suddenly would become beauties, popular girls. They would paint their hair pink and blue and attract this alpha dudes. I don't even know how to describe it, but that was the vibe. And I would have loved to read queer romances, but they were not available to me at the time. I would pick up crumbs from a variety of different books, and I love those crumbs and I cherish them. I remember in one of my mom's historical romances, I believe it was Beatrice Small, I read a scene, a very brief scene between two men. They didn't even kiss, I think, but it was obvious that they were lovers, and it was so important to me that I stole this book from my mom and reread it all the time. So I read those cringe teen romances. I also read my mom's historical romances because I just could access them. I also read heavier adult fantasy. I remember reading The Nine Princess of Amber, though there were no female characters at all in those books. It was pretty drab. I remember reading Anne Rice a lot, and I'm not sure if the librarian in our school actually read those books because in no way she would allow us to take it out. I also loved a lot of classical adventure books like The Count of Monte Cristo, Three Musketeers, Treasure Island. What was it called? I think it was Gulliver's Travels by Swift. Loved those, read them a lot. I definitely still love these elements. My romance tastes definitely matured. I'm still into fantasy, but far less than I was at the time. And my mystery tastes are different in a way that I still love cozy mystery and like lighter stuff. But I also love grim, bloody, gory mysteries, thrillers, etc., etc. Still love adventures, but I don't feel like there's a big market for adventures. I don't encounter them often. They're usually a part of the package with a different genre, usually fantasy. The sixth question is, did you feel inspired to read by your school? And if yes, how did your upbringing encourage reading? I don't feel like we were necessarily inspired to read at school, though we've been given a lot of summer reading lists that were voluntary. But my dad really wanted me to read a lot, though when I was a child I believed he was a big reader, but it turned out he was not a reader at all. He was a collector. He collected a lot of classics and a lot of children's books over his life, and he was eager for anyone to use his private library. So I have not seen him with a book ever, if we're being honest, but he owns a lot of them still. He himself is a mathematician, he's an engineer, and he's definitely more into that stuff than reading, though he always thought that being a reader is important for development, so he encouraged us to read. My brother hated reading though. He never read. He still doesn't read. I feel like my dad was more of an influence when it came to reading. The seventh question is, what book have you wanted to return to lately? And I have two answers for you. One came up to me while answering the other question, which is Alice in the Wonderland. I feel like the book will give me much more in my 30s. And the thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately is The Interview with the Vampire, or The Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice, because I finished watching the 2 seasons of the latest adaptation, and I think it's brilliant, phenomenal, and everything we ever wanted as fans of the series. But at the same time, I myself stopped reading the book series, I think on book 5, and it's pretty long. So I'm interested where Anne Rice went with the whole thing, but I'm not sure I would be able to reread the whole thing again. Anne Rice has a very wordy, very gothic writing style, and the books are thick. Plus, the first book is excruciatingly boring, and I'm willing to admit it. If you claw yourself through the first book, you will enjoy the series more. It's a phenomenal series, but the first book is such a downer, mostly because of Louis. Louis is such a downer. He's such a miserable character, and it's hard to read from his point of view. So I'm not surprised when I hear that a lot of people do not finish the first book and never continue. The next question is your favorite or formative young adult series. I have not read a lot young adult series as a child. I have not read The Hunger Games at the peak of its popularity. I read it as an adult later in life. I read Harry Potter, but for me it's just a middle grade series. I have not read the Chronicles of Narnia or the Percy Jackson books. They were just not very popular locally, so I don't even remember them in the bookstore, like visually. So I'm not even sure they were translated back in the day. But I definitely read quite a bit of local young adult fantasy. I wouldn't be able to pinpoint any series in particular because there were a lot of them, and I wasn't even reading them in order or like a series. I would pick up the books randomly. There was a flood of these types of books after the success that Harry Potter had. They were all about the chosen ones. The chosen one trope was it. I read a lot of the ones that were with female protagonists, because the thing that I have not related to at all in Harry Potter was that the protagonist was male. So I really wanted the ones with female characters, plus they had a little bit of romance usually, so I was in. I love those, but formative is a bit of a stretch. The ninth question is a book you had to read in school but you loved. The first thing that comes to mind is The Portrait of Dorian Gray, though I read it in uni the second time. I read it myself during high school, I think, and then I read it in uni for my class on symbolism in literature, and I loved it both times, and I'm sure if I read it again, I love it again. The 10th question is your reader's favorite book. It's definitely Perfume by Patrick Süskind. We were obsessed with this book for quite a bit with my friends. I think one of our friends read it first, and then she gave the book to us so we would read it also. And we read it way before the adaptation, and then it was adapted. It's about this serial killer, and it's a classic novel that reads like a modern book. It's about the serial killer that wants to create the perfect perfume. He's obsessed with perfumery and with smells and scents. And he wants to encapsulate the scent of a woman that he fell in love with and murdered. It's pretty gory, psychological, very, very fascinating. Also very well written. I love this book. I still would gladly reread it, and I think I would enjoy it. The 11th question is, if your 13-year-old self could live in a fictional world, which would it be? Is it different from the world you choose now? Interestingly enough, no, not really. When I was a teen, I really wanted to go to a magical school or a magical university, and I kind of want to go to magical university now. I think the wonder that I have for magical universities, this specific settings, are because I went to uni in my own city, and while some of the other students in my uni moved out of their parents' house and had far more freedom, I lived with my parents because why would I leave if I live in the same town? I never got to experience the full potential, the full freedom of university. So I think that's one of the reasons why I'm kind of into the idea of going to a magical university with like a walkable campus and all that jazz. But I don't think it will ever happen because I'm a little too old for uni now. So I feel like I've never closed this chapter of my life because of it. I was kind of always wistful of it. And I gladly read books set in magical universities now. For example, I'm reading The Ninth House, and the setting is my favorite part. It's set in a magical Yale. The 12th and the last question is there a newly released book you wish you had when you were younger? I would have loved a lot of core books that I read today because I didn't have much, as I said. I only had crumbs. When I found Fried Green Tomatoes, I was ecstatic, especially because it's an older book, and this book actually was not something that I found myself. My friend found it, she read it first and she gave it to me. I also remember saving up money for Sarah Waters books that I found in the bookstore. Thankfully, the cashiers very rarely know what the books are about. They very rarely read, so it wasn't odd to them that I, as a teenager, bought pretty adult books in the store. So I would have loved that, obviously, as a young queer person, seeing myself in those stories, relating. I would have loved reading about those characters, being happy, being in relationships, being loved, desired, and wanted, having a future. It would have been incredible. Though Sarah Waters really helped because a lot of her books have happy endings. Also would have loved to read modern young adult fantasy as a child because it's just so diverse. There's so much out there on the market. I don't even mean diverse demographics, though that is also a case, but just more adventure stuff that feels youthful. A lot of the classic fantasy is written for children, but at the same time it's written for adults, if you know what I mean. When I tried reading some classical fantasy stuff that was targeted at children, I immediately noticed how much influence the adult world had on those novels, because these novels had to be interesting not just for kids, but also for adults that supposedly were reading these books to their kids. And I think now there's a little more variety in the genre. So I would have loved to get that as a child. So these are the books that I remember reading as a child, the habits that I had about reading. I think the most hilarious part of it is that I read to escape the chores. In the comments down below, tell me about your favorite book, the book that you wished you had as a child, because that's also very interesting. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I will see you soon with another video, but until then,